Hello, everyone. Tonight, we will delve into the most intimate corners of one of the most fascinating and complex civilizations in human history, ancient Rome, exploring the depths of its sexual life. This will be the story not only of emperors and senators, but also of how millions of ordinary people lived, loved, and desired. We will open the doors to a world vastly different from our modern one, sometimes surprising, sometimes understandable, but always human. We will go beyond the familiar narratives and discover perhaps lesser-known, sleepy details and the everyday experiences of ordinary people. Before embarking on this epic journey as the Sleepy History family, we have a small request. We would be very happy if you support us by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. I'm also curious, where are you watching this story from, and what time is it for you? If you share in the comments, it would be wonderful to see that we are a huge family from different geographies and time zones. You can share with me the events you want me to talk about in future videos. Now, let's listen to the most intimate whispers of ancient Rome. Walking through the streets of Rome, said to have been founded in 753 BC, the first thing that would probably catch your attention would be the liveliness and complexity of the city. But upon closer inspection, you begin to realize how different this civilization's view of sexuality was from today's. Roman society did not view sexuality as merely a private matter. Rather, it was perceived as an integral part of social order, political power, and social status. The Roman understanding of sexual morality was based on two important concepts: virtues and pudicitia. Virtues represented masculine virtue and heroism, while pudicitia expressed chastity and moral purity. These concepts were not only individual characteristics, but also the cornerstones of social identity. A Roman citizen's place in society was directly related to how closely they lived up to these values. Walking towards the Roman Forum in the early morning light, the statues and frescoes you encountered had much to say. Sexuality was by no means a hidden subject in Roman art. Priapus statues, depicting the fertility god with exaggerated sexual organs, stood at the entrances of houses and were believed to ward off evil spirits. This was the first clue to how Roman society perceived sexuality. It was a natural part of life and nothing to be ashamed of. Roman sexual morality may seem contradictory when viewed through modern standards. On the one hand, it displayed an extremely tolerant and open-minded approach, while on the other, strict social hierarchies and gender roles defined the limits of this tolerance. This contradiction stemmed from the complex structure of Roman society. Walking around the Forum, you notice how naturally topics related to sexuality are discussed in the conversations you overhear. Romans did not shy away from talking about sex, but the tone and content of these conversations varied depending on the speaker's social status and gender. The style of conversation between a member of a patrician family and a liberty, even if the subject was the same, had completely different characteristics. To understand Roman sexual life, one must first grasp the social structure of this civilization. Roman society made a sharp distinction between citizens and non-citizens. This distinction also played a decisive role when it came to sexual life. The sexual behavior of a Roman citizen was not only a reflection of personal preferences, but also of social responsibilities. As the day progresses and you wander through different parts of the city, you begin to see how sexuality permeated Roman life. Everyone, from the wealthy families living in luxurious villas on the Palatine Hill to the working class living in the narrow streets of the Subura district, had their own unique sexual culture. This diversity was a natural result of Rome's cosmopolitan structure. Roman law contained detailed rules governing sexual life. These rules determined not only what was legal, but also what was socially acceptable. Laws such as the Lex Julia de Adulterius regulated extramarital relationships, while also codifying discrimination based on gender and social class. Within this legal framework, the concepts of active and passive roles were critical for Roman citizens. The active role represented dominance and power, while the passive role signified submission and weakness. This distinction was a fundamental principle applicable not only to sexual relationships, but also to social interactions. A Roman citizen was expected to be in the active role, as this was an indicator of their social status. The time spent in the baths in the afternoon heat provided important clues to understanding Roman sexual culture. In the Thermae, naked bodies were considered normal, and close physical contact between men was seen as part of everyday life. Interpreting this situation through a modern lens can be misleading. For Roman society, physical closeness did not necessarily have sexual connotations. This relaxed atmosphere in the baths reflected the Roman perception of the body. The human body was not something to be ashamed of. On the contrary, it was a structure to be cared for and displayed. This approach was linked to the concept of kalos, beauty, inherited from Greek culture. A beautiful body was a tool that reflected its owner's virtue and social status. Towards evening, sexuality took on a different dimension at banquets held in the triclinium rooms of wealthy homes. At these gatherings, conversations over wine often drifted towards sexual topics. However, the language and style of these conversations varied according to the social status of the participants. Among educated patricians, sexuality was generally addressed with philosophical and literary references, while people from lower classes used more direct language. The presence and participation of women at these banquets was also important for understanding sexual culture. Married women usually attended these gatherings with their husbands, but their participation in the conversations was limited. In contrast, educated courtesans, known as hetairai, could behave more freely in these environments and actively participate in the conversations. Age also played a critical role in Roman sexual morality. Different rules applied to young people and adults. While a passive role was acceptable, even considered normal, for young men up to a certain age, for adult Roman citizens, this behavior was seen as damaging to their social status. As the night progressed, the sounds coming from different parts of the city revealed the diversity of Roman sexual life. The contrast between the silence of the aristocratic neighborhoods and the noisy streets of Subura reflected not only an economic, but also a cultural divide. Each social class had its own sexual codes, its own forbidden and permitted areas. The expansion of the Roman Empire led to the integration of sexual practices from different cultures into Roman life. The cult of Isis from Egypt and the belief in Cybele from Anatolia, each with their own sexual rituals, enriched Rome's religious life. This diversity demonstrated Rome's tolerant nature, but it also led to the questioning of traditional values. Late at night, in the silence of the houses, the most intimate aspects of sexuality were experienced. Even the architecture of Roman houses was designed with this privacy in mind. The bedrooms, called cubicula, were arranged not only for sleep, but also as places where the most intimate moments were experienced. The frescoes on the walls of these rooms often contained erotic scenes, setting the atmosphere of the room. Rome's nightlife offered important clues for understanding its sexual culture. Nightclubs, taverns, and popina were not just places to drink, but also venues for sexual encounters. These places were one of the rare spaces where people from different social classes came together. Within this general framework, the elements shaping Roman sexual life formed a complex network. Factors such as law, religion, social class, gender, age, and even geographical origin came together to determine each individual's sexual experience. Understanding this experience meant understanding not only individual preferences, but also the values and contradictions of an entire civilization. Walking through the streets of Rome late at night, you realize how layered and complex the sexual culture of this ancient civilization was. Every street, every building, every person was part of this great drama. Roman sexual life was not just a matter of individual desires, but also an arena where power, status, religion, and political calculations were intertwined. To understand this complex structure, we need to take a closer look at the fundamental institutions of Roman society, especially the family structure. Because in Rome, sexuality was never entirely a private matter. On the contrary, it was perceived as a fundamental force that ensured the continuation of the family, lineage, and social order. How this perception took shape and how it affected daily life forms the basis of the story we will tell. You wake up in the early hours of the morning in the home of a Roman citizen. Before dawn breaks, there is a flurry of activity in the house. This activity is not just about daily chores. It provides important clues to understanding the basic structure of the Roman family, how the institution of marriage functioned, and the place of sexual life within the family. The Roman family was shaped around the concept of familia. This concept encompassed not only blood relatives, but also slaves, freedmen, and sometimes clients. The pater familias, who stood at the head of the family, was not just a father, but also the person with absolute authority over all members of the family, including life and death. This authority was known as patria potestas and was one of the fundamental institutions of Roman society. Walking through the house, you begin to observe how the family's sexual life was organized. The pater familias's bedroom is the largest and most elaborately decorated part of the house. The frescoes on its walls usually depict scenes of Venus, the goddess of fertility. This is not merely a decorative choice, it is also a symbolic representation of fertility, which will ensure the family's continuity. The Roman marriage system was based on two fundamental forms: matrimonium cum manu and matrimonium sine manu. In the first type, the woman became a member of her husband's family, while in the second type, she remained a member of her own family. This difference had a profound impact, not only legally, but also on sexual life. In a cum manu marriage, the woman was almost entirely under her husband's control, while in a sine manu marriage, she could enjoy greater autonomy. Watching the family gather for breakfast, you realize that Roman marriage was shaped more by practical concerns than by love. Most marriages were the result of agreements between families. In these agreements, economic interests, political connections, and increased social status were the main motivations. However, this did not mean that love and passion could not develop between spouses. It simply meant that these were secondary considerations. Observing the daily life of a young bride, you begin to see the boundaries and freedoms in the sexual life of Roman women. Before marriage, protecting a girl's pudicitia, chastity, was critically important for her family. This was not only a moral issue, but also an economic value, as virginity was used as an important bargaining chip in marriage negotiations. The matron of the house, the housewife, represented the most complex example of female sexuality in Roman society. On the one hand, she was expected to remain faithful to her husband, and on the other, she was expected to be a figure who reflected the family's social status. Every detail, from the matron's style of dress to her behavior, reflected the family's respectability. As the day progresses, while observing the arrangements for the education of the household's male children, you begin to understand Rome's view of male sexuality. Sexual experience for young men was seen as part of their education. However, there were strict rules about how this experience should be had. While it was considered normal for a young Roman citizen to have sexual relations with his slaves or foreigners, having a passive relationship with free Roman citizens of the same age could damage his social status. The situation was completely different for the girls of the household. Their sexual education was usually postponed until their wedding night. The role of mothers was critical in this process. Elderly matrons tried to teach young girls the realities of married life, usually through indirect means. This teaching process took the form of mythological stories, religious rituals, and hints squeezed into everyday conversations. At noon, when you glance at the other villas around the house, you begin to observe similar routines in neighboring families. Each Roman family functioned like a small state within itself. The paterfamilias's authority extended not only to his own family, but also to client families. Within this extended family network, sexual relationships created a complex social dynamic. Roman marriage rituals were significant in terms of demonstrating the social dimension of sexual life. The wedding ceremony meant not only the union of two people, but also the celebration of an alliance between two families. The ritual of taking the bride from her home was a symbolic demonstration of severing her ties with her old family and integrating her into her new family. The wedding night, the prima nox ritual, was one of the most intimate moments of Roman sexual culture. This night was not only a physical union, but also a rite of passage, where social statuses were redefined. After this night, the young bride was now recognized as a mulier, woman, whereas before she had been referred to as a virgo, virgin. In the quiet of the afternoon, sitting in the inner courtyard of the house, you begin to see more clearly the social codes that govern the sexual lives of Roman families. These codes, though unwritten, were known to everyone. For example, while a woman having sexual relations with her husband's slaves could cause jealousy, it did not constitute a legal problem. However, the same woman having relations with another free man was considered not only a moral, but also a legal crime. This double standard reflected Roman society's view of gender roles. For men, sexual freedom was a sign of power and status, while for women, sexual fidelity was critical to preserving the family's honor. This situation was not limited to the upper classes. Similar patterns of behavior were observed in every stratum of society. In Roman families, childbirth was not merely a biological process, but also a political and economic act. Children were seen as the guarantee of the family's future and the providers of continuity for the lineage. Therefore, rituals and beliefs related to fertility were an integral part of Roman sexual culture. As evening approaches, observing the family gathering around the dinner table, you begin to see how intergenerational relationships were shaped. The authority of the elderly paterfamilias could even influence the sexual lives of young couples. On many matters, from which room they would sleep in to when they would decide to have children, the approval of the family elder might be required. Within this system, you begin to notice that Roman women developed strategies. The fact that official authority lay with men did not mean that women were completely powerless. Smart and diplomatic matrons could turn the dynamics of the household to their advantage, indirectly influencing their husbands' decisions. As the night progressed, you would have the opportunity to observe more intimate interactions between family members in the quieter corners of the house. The private moments between husband and wife showed that Roman marriage was not just a social institution, but could also be a partnership that fulfilled emotional and physical needs. The concept of affectio maritalis in Roman law, emphasized that mutual love and respect should be at the foundation of marriage. This concept showed that genuine emotional bonds could develop even within practical marriages. References to the loving relationships between spouses on many tombstones were proof that Roman marriages were not merely business agreements. Observing what happened in the slave quarters of the house, however, reveals the darkest aspects of Roman sexual culture. Slave women and men could be obliged to satisfy their master's sexual needs. This situation was accepted by society not only as individual abuse, but also as a systemic practice. The sexual lives of slaves were entirely under the control of their masters. Fundamental decisions, such as whom they would marry, when they would have children, and even how long they could keep their children with them, were made according to the interests of their masters rather than their own desires. Walking through the garden late at night, you begin to think about how the different strata of Roman families came together. Within this complex structure, sexuality was not just a personal experience, but also part of the social order. The sexual behavior of each individual could affect the stability of the family and consequently of society. In Roman marriage culture, divorce was also an important aspect of sexual life. The divorce process, called divortium, was relatively easy to carry out, especially for men. A Roman citizen could separate from his wife simply by saying, "Te dimitto," I release you. This ease led to marriages having a dynamic structure. The status of divorced women held a special place in Roman society. Although their second marriages were generally less formal than their first, they could gain more freedom in their sexual lives. Elderly matrons, especially wealthy widows, could become important centers of power in Roman society. Within this general framework, the sexual culture of the Roman family was shaped by a constant tension between traditional values and everyday realities. There were often significant differences between the idealized patterns of behavior and the behaviors exhibited in real life. As midnight approaches, imagining the intimate moments taking place in different rooms of the house, you begin to grasp how complex the sexual dynamics of the Roman family were. Each family member experienced sexuality within the limits and possibilities specific to their position. These experiences were shaped at the intersection of individual desires and social expectations. Understanding Roman marriage culture sheds light not only on the social structure of that period, but also on the origins of today's family institution. Many elements of the modern understanding of marriage carry over from Roman tradition. At the same time, the contradictions and tensions of that period continue to be experienced in similar ways in today's societies. At this point, a more detailed examination of the daily life of the Roman family is necessary. This is because real sexual experiences took shape in the flow of daily life, beyond theoretical rules. How an ordinary Roman citizen spent their day and how they interacted in their sexual life will be the subject of the next part of our story. As the sun begins to rise over Rome, the city slowly awakens and the rhythm of daily life begins. By following the day of an ordinary Roman citizen, you begin to discover how sexuality touched the moments of daily life. This is not just a story of intimate moments. It is also a story of how sexuality was intertwined with ordinary activities, such as social interactions, work life, entertainment, and even shopping. With the first light of dawn, you witness the start of the day in the home of a middle-class Roman citizen. Marcus Aurelius Calvus, a 35-year-old merchant, lives with his wife Claudia in a modest but comfortable house on the Esquiline Hill. His morning routine is a perfect starting point for seeing the reflections of Rome's sexual culture in everyday life. As soon as Marcus wakes up, the frescoes on the walls of his bedroom catch his attention. These paintings are not merely decorative. They also contain symbolic messages that carry the intimacy of the night into the day. The union of Venus and Mars, the bountiful hand of Priapus, and erotic scenes between various mythological figures remind him of the presence of sexuality even at the start of the day. Even everyday household items carry sexual connotations. Phallic motifs on mirror handles, erotic reliefs on oil lamps, and even fertility symbols on kitchenware show how sexuality permeated every corner of Roman life. These elements, which could be considered pornographic by modern standards, were completely normal and even sacred at the time. Observing Claudia's morning preparation rituals, you begin to see how sexuality was integrated into the daily life of a Roman woman. The way she combs her hair, the cosmetics she applies to her face, the color and shape of the tunics she wears, and even the jewelry she adorns herself with. All are carefully chosen to enhance sexual appeal or convey specific social messages. The cosmetic products used by Roman women were not only for beautification, they were also believed to possess magical properties designed to enhance sexual appeal. Lead-based white powder, henna-stained lips, and kohl-lined eyes were all tools for expressing a woman's sexual identity. This preparation process was a kind of armor-donning ritual for the social interactions that would take place during the rest of the day. While observing the interactions of family members during breakfast, you notice the everyday reflections of sexuality in family dynamics. Marcus's gestures and facial expressions towards his wife, Claudia's behavior towards the children, even the forms of respect shown by the slaves towards their masters, are all everyday expressions of the sexual hierarchy. As Marcus prepares to leave the house, his clothing choices reveal how Roman men expressed their sexuality in daily life. How the toga was worn, the accessories he carried with him, even his gait, were all elements that reflected his sexual identity and social status. For Roman men, the concept of dignitas, dignity, was inseparable from sexual attractiveness. When you walk out onto the street, you are struck by how visible sexuality is in everyday Roman life. Phallic symbols on shop signs, graffiti, even amulets sold on street corners all show that sexuality was an integral part of daily life. This reflects a culture of openness very different from our contemporary understanding of privacy. The people you encounter walking towards the Roman Forum express their sexuality in different ways because they come from different social classes. The difference between the gait of a woman from the patrician class and the posture of a freed woman reflects not only their social status, but also their sexual identity. Marcus's shop is an ideal setting to see how sexuality played a role in Roman commercial life. References to sexual topics in conversations with customers are quite natural. Special perfumes for female customers, potency-enhancing herbs for male customers, fertility charms for couples. All are part of everyday commerce. Sexuality in commercial relationships was sometimes used directly as a marketing tool. Displaying beautiful slave girls in shop windows was a well-known method of attracting male customers. Although this conflicts with our modern ethical understanding, it was a normal part of Roman commercial culture. As noon approaches, Marcus's preparations to go to the thermae, baths, offer a new opportunity to explore the social dimension of sexuality in Roman daily life. Baths were not only places of cleansing, but also venues for social interaction, political debate, and yes, sexual tension. As he walks to the baths, his conversations with friends he encounters on the street reveal how sexuality was addressed in Roman male friendships. Jokes, suggestive remarks, comments about wives, all are expressions that reinforce male solidarity, but also reproduce sexual hierarchies. The bathhouse environment, where naked bodies were displayed naturally, is critical to understanding the Roman perception of the body. Men of different ages could openly see and evaluate each other's bodies. This situation provided an opportunity to observe how sexual attractiveness was linked to social status. Massage sessions in the baths are important for discovering the social meanings of physical contact in Rome. While relaxing under the hands of slave masseuses, Marcus's physical relaxation is a non-sexual but also sexually connected experience. In Roman culture, physical pleasure could be experienced free from guilt. In the afternoon, Marcus's time spent in the coffee houses around the Forum shows how sexuality was discussed in Roman social life. Alongside topics such as politics, trade, and sports, sexuality was also a natural topic of conversation. However, the language and tone of these conversations varied according to the social status of the participants. The stories you hear in these environments reveal the sexual nuances of everyday Roman life. Which senator had a relationship with which actress? Which merchant's wife was unfaithful? Which young man was close to which teacher? All were part of the functioning of the social network and the balance of power. Towards evening, Marcus's journey home offers an opportunity to discover the different atmosphere of Rome's streets at night. With sunset, the city's sexual pulse begins to beat faster. People gathering in front of taverns, the sensual tunes played by street musicians, different lifestyles becoming more apparent as darkness falls. When he arrives home, his evening conversations with Claudia reveal how married couples deal with sexuality in everyday life. As they share the day's experiences, occasional jokes, innuendos, and touches with sexual connotations reveal the intimate dynamics of married life. The family gathering during dinner provides an opportunity to observe the everyday moments of intergenerational transmission of sexual culture. The advice the elderly mother gives her young daughter-in-law, the indirect messages the father gives his son, are all examples of the transmission of Roman sexual culture from generation to generation. After dinner, visits to neighbors show how sexuality is subject to social control in Roman social life. In the conversations between the neighboring women, who spends how much time with which man, how often which married couple has sex, even which young girl has reached marriageable age, are all subjects of social scrutiny. As the night progressed, intimate moments in different rooms of the house provided an opportunity to discover the personal dimension of sexuality in Roman daily life. The intimacy between husband and wife in the bedroom was not only a physical union, but also a moment to relieve the stress of the day and strengthen emotional bonds. Observing these intimate moments, you also notice the practical aspects of Roman sexual culture. Which positions were preferred when sexual activity was more intense? Which methods were used for pregnancy and birth control? All were practical solutions for daily life. Aphrodisiac herbs used in Rome, foods believed to enhance sexual performance, fertility rituals, all were practiced as part of daily life. These practices were critical not only for personal pleasure, but also for the continuation of the family line. As midnight approaches, the different sexual experiences taking place on different floors of the house reflect the stratified structure of Roman society. The relationships between master and slave, the intimacy between spouses, the experiences of young adults, all take place under the same roof, but under different conditions. When you step out onto the street in the depths of the night, you begin to discover the sexual dimensions of Roman nightlife. The illuminated windows of the lupanaria, brothels, the sounds of music coming from the taverns, the shadowy figures waiting on street corners, all are reflections of the city's sexual pulse in its nightlife. The people from different social classes you encounter during this night walk show how sexuality stretches social boundaries in nightlife. People separated by strict social rules during the day can have closer interactions in the darkness of night. The graffiti on street corners offers the crudest expressions of sexuality in everyday Roman life. Writings such as Marcus loves Claudia. Lucius is here with beautiful girls, and beware of Gaius, the married seduces women, are both personal stories and anonymous expressions of social dynamics. Walking home in the quiet of the night, you begin to think about how natural and widespread sexuality was in everyday Roman life. This was not just a personal experience, but also an integral part of the social order, economic relations, social status, and cultural identity. The daily sexual experience of Roman citizens was shaped by a very different understanding of privacy than in our contemporary world. The boundaries between the personal and the social were much more permeable and ambiguous than they are today. This situation created both freedoms and limitations. This exploration of daily life, which lasted until morning, clearly highlights the differences between the theoretical rules of Roman sexual culture and practical life. People were constantly seeking to strike a balance between official expectations and personal desires. Understanding these everyday experiences is critical to grasping the sexual dynamics of Roman society. Because real life was never a perfect application of theoretical rules. Rather, it was a dynamic process that was constantly negotiated and reshaped. At this point, it is necessary to examine the specific position and experiences of women in Roman daily life in more detail. This is because women's sexual lives were surrounded by different boundaries, opportunities, and dangers than those of men. How a Roman woman's sexual experience was shaped according to her social status, age, and marital status is the subject of the next part of the story we will tell. As the sun began to rise over Rome, the city slowly awoke and the rhythm of daily life began. By following the day of an ordinary Roman citizen, you begin to discover how sexuality touched the moments of daily life. This is not just a story of intimate moments. It is also a story of how sexuality was intertwined with ordinary activities, such as social interactions, work life, entertainment, and even shopping. With the first light of dawn, you witness the start of the day in the home of a middle-class Roman citizen, Marcus Aurelius Calvus, a 35-year-old merchant, lives with his wife Claudia in a modest but comfortable house on the Esquiline Hill. His morning routine is a perfect starting point for seeing the reflections of Rome's sexual culture in everyday life. As soon as Marcus wakes up, the frescoes on the walls of his bedroom catch his attention. These paintings are not merely decorative. They also contain symbolic messages that carry the intimacy of the night into the day. The union of Venus and Mars, the bountiful hand of Priapus, and erotic scenes between various mythological figures remind him of the presence of sexuality even at the start of the day. Even everyday household items carry sexual connotations. Phallic motifs on mirror handles, erotic reliefs on oil lamps, and even fertility symbols on kitchenware show how sexuality permeated every corner of Roman life. These elements, which could be considered pornographic by modern standards, were completely normal and even sacred at the time. Observing Claudia's morning preparation rituals, you begin to see how sexuality was integrated into the daily life of a Roman woman. The way she combs her hair, the cosmetics she applies to her face, the color and shape of the tunic she wears, and even the jewelry she adorns herself with. All are carefully chosen to enhance sexual appeal or convey specific social messages. The cosmetic products used by Roman women were not only for beautification, they were also believed to possess magical properties designed to enhance sexual appeal. Lead-based white powder, henna-stained lips, and kohl-lined eyes were all tools for expressing a woman's sexual identity. This preparation process was a kind of armor-donning ritual for the social interactions that would take place for the rest of the day. While observing the interactions between family members during breakfast, you notice the everyday reflections of sexuality in family dynamics. Marcus's gestures and facial expressions toward his wife, Claudia's behavior toward the children, even the forms of respect shown by slaves toward their masters. All are everyday expressions of sexual hierarchy. As Marcus prepares to leave the house, his clothing choices demonstrate how Roman men presented their sexuality in daily life. How the toga was worn, the accessories carried, even the style of walking, were all elements that reflected his sexual identity and social status. For the Roman man, the concept of dignitas, respectability, was inseparable from sexual attractiveness. When you walk out onto the street, you are struck by how visible sexuality is in everyday Roman life. Phallic symbols on shop signs, graffiti, even amulets sold on street corners all show that sexuality was an integral part of daily life. This reflects a culture of openness very different from our contemporary understanding of privacy. The people you encounter walking towards the Roman Forum express their sexuality in different ways because they come from different social classes. The difference between the gait of a woman from the patrician class and the posture of a freed woman reflects not only their social status, but also their sexual identity. Marcus's shop is an ideal setting to see how sexuality played a role in Roman commercial life. References to sexual topics are quite natural in conversations with customers. Special perfumes for female customers, potency-enhancing herbs for male customers, fertility charms for couples. All are part of everyday commerce. Sexuality in commercial relationships is sometimes used directly as a marketing tool. Displaying beautiful slave girls in shop windows is a well-known method of attracting male customers. Although this conflicts with our modern ethical understanding, it was a normal part of Roman commercial culture. As noon approaches, Marcus's preparations to go to the thermae, or baths, offer a new opportunity to explore the social dimension of sexuality in Roman daily life. Baths were not only places of cleansing, but also venues for social interaction, political debate, and yes, sexual tension. As he walks to the baths, his conversations with friends he encounters on the street reveal how sexuality was addressed in Roman male friendships. Jokes, suggestive remarks, comments about wives, all are expressions that reinforce male solidarity, but also reproduce sexual hierarchies. The bathhouse environment, where naked bodies were displayed naturally, is critical to understanding the Roman perception of the body. Men of different ages could openly see and evaluate each other's bodies. This situation provided an opportunity to observe how sexual attractiveness was linked to social status. Massage sessions in the baths are important for discovering the social meanings of physical contact in Rome. While relaxing under the hands of slave masseuses, Marcus's physical relaxation is a non-sexual but also sexually connected experience. In Roman culture, physical pleasure could be experienced free from guilt. In the afternoon, Marcus's time spent in the coffee houses around the Forum shows how sexuality was discussed in Roman social life. Alongside topics such as politics, trade, and sports, sexuality was also a natural topic of conversation. However, the language and tone of these conversations varied according to the social status of the participants. The stories you hear in these environments reveal the sexual nuances of everyday Roman life. Which senator had a relationship with which actress? Which merchant's wife was unfaithful? Which young man was close to which teacher? All were part of the functioning of the social network and the balance of power. Towards evening, Marcus's journey home offers an opportunity to discover the different atmosphere of Rome's streets at night. With sunset, the city's sexual pulse begins to beat faster. People gathering in front of taverns, the sensual tunes played by street musicians, different lifestyles becoming more apparent as darkness falls. When he arrives home, his evening conversations with Claudia reveal how married couples deal with sexuality in everyday life. As they share the day's experiences, occasional jokes, innuendos, and touches with sexual connotations reveal the intimate dynamics of married life. The family gathering during dinner provides an opportunity to observe the everyday moments of intergenerational transmission of sexual culture. The advice the elderly mother gives her young daughter-in-law, the indirect messages the father gives his son, are all examples of the transmission of Roman sexual culture from generation to generation. After dinner, visits to neighbors show how sexuality is subject to social control in Roman social life. In the conversations between the neighboring women, who spends how much time with which man, how often which married couple has sex, even which young girl has reached marriageable age, are all subjects of social scrutiny. As the night progresses, intimate moments in different rooms of the house offer a glimpse into the personal dimension of sexuality in Roman daily life. The intimacy between husband and wife in the bedroom is not just a physical union, but also a moment to relieve the stress of the day and strengthen emotional bonds. Observing these intimate moments, you also notice the practical aspects of Roman sexual culture. Which positions were preferred when sexual activity was more intense? Which methods were used for pregnancy and birth control? All were practical solutions for everyday life. Aphrodisiac herbs used in Rome, foods believed to enhance sexual performance, fertility rituals, all were practiced as part of daily life. These practices were critical not only for personal pleasure, but also for the continuation of the family line. As midnight approaches, the different sexual experiences taking place on different floors of the house reflect the stratified structure of Roman society. The relationships between master and slave, the intimacy between spouses, the experiences of young adults, all take place under the same roof, but under different conditions. When you step out onto the street in the depths of the night, you begin to discover the sexual dimensions of Roman nightlife. The illuminated windows of the lupanaria, brothels, the sounds of music coming from the taverns, the shadowy figures waiting on street all are reflections of the city's sexual pulse in its nightlife. The people from different social classes you encounter during this night walk show how sexuality stretches social boundaries in nightlife. People separated by strict social rules during the day can have closer interactions in the darkness of night. The graffiti on street corners offers the crudest expressions of sexuality in everyday Roman life. Writings such as, "Marcus loves Claudia," "Lucius is here with beautiful girls," and "Beware of Gaius, he seduces married women," are both personal stories and anonymous expressions of social dynamics. Walking home in the quiet of the night, you begin to think about how natural and widespread sexuality was in everyday Roman life. This was not just a personal experience, but also an integral part of the social order, economic relations, social status, and cultural identity. The daily sexual experience of Roman citizens was shaped by a very different understanding of privacy than in our contemporary world. The boundaries between the personal and the social were much more permeable and ambiguous than they are today. This situation created both freedoms and limitations. This exploration of daily life, which lasted until morning, clearly highlights the differences between the theoretical rules of Roman sexual culture and practical life. People were constantly seeking to strike a balance between official expectations and personal desires. Understanding these everyday experiences is critical to grasping the sexual dynamics of Roman society. Because real life was never a perfect application of theoretical rules. Rather, it was a dynamic process that was constantly negotiated and reshaped. At this point, it is necessary to examine the specific position and experiences of women in Roman daily life in more detail. This is because women's sexual lives were surrounded by different boundaries, opportunities, and dangers than those of men. How a Roman woman's sexual experience was shaped according to her social status, age, and marital status is the subject of the next part of the story we will tell. At noon, when the Roman sun was high in the sky, you find yourself in the military training ground held in the field of Mars. Here, the 32-year-old soldier Gaius Valerius Maximus displayed the purest form of Roman masculinity. His bronzed muscles, armor glistening in the sun, and confident posture laid bare the fundamental elements of male identity in Roman culture. This was not merely a physical display. It was also a fundamental performance that determined a Roman man's position in society, his sexual identity, and the balance of power. To understand the concept of Roman masculinity, one must first understand the concept of virtue. This word encompassed not only moral values, but also masculine strength, courage, honor, and sexual dominance. For a Roman man, virtue was not innate, but a trait that had to be constantly proven. It was a performance that had to be re-established every day, in every interaction, in every social setting. Observing Gaius's morning training routine, you realize how the Roman male body was perceived as an instrument of power. Every muscle, every movement was a display of masculine strength and therefore sexual superiority. However, this was not just physical strength. It was also an arena for demonstrating discipline, control, and the ability to establish dominance. Interactions between soldiers during military training provided important clues for understanding the sexual dimensions of Roman male camaraderie. Competition, banter, and even physical contact between men were all part of the performance of masculinity. In this environment, each man had to establish and maintain his position. The distinction between active and passive roles in Roman male culture applied not only to sexual relationships, but to all social interactions. Being active, establishing dominance, and maintaining control were fundamental elements of masculine virtue. Remaining passive, surrendering, and being controlled were considered incompatible with male honor. Gaius's conversations with other soldiers during lunch revealed how Roman men approached sexuality. In these conversations, women, slaves, and young men were often characterized as sexual objects. This objectification served as a tool to reinforce male supremacy. The sexual dimension of Roman military culture manifested itself not only in conversations, but also in practical applications. During campaigns, sexual domination over prisoners of war is perceived as part of military victory. This was not merely a pursuit of individual pleasure, but also a symbolic expression of Roman supremacy. Following Gaius as he returns to the city in the afternoon, you begin to observe how Roman masculinity functioned in civilian life. The political debates in the forum, the business relationships he established in the shops, were all different arenas of masculine performance. Having a say in political life was an integral part of a Roman man's sexual identity. Being able to speak in the Senate, to be influential in votes, to determine policy, these were institutional expressions of male supremacy. The exclusion of women from political life was critical to maintaining this male dominance. Male dominance in the Roman legal system was also critically important in terms of regulating sexual life. Men had legal rights over the sexual lives of their wives, slaves, and children. These rights were not only legal regulations, but also institutional guarantees of masculinity. Observing how Gaius, a married Roman man, established his authority at home, you realize how male dominance functioned in domestic life. controlling his wife's daily activities, directing his children's education, determining the behavior of the household slaves. All were part of his performance of masculinity. However, this dominance was lived in constant tension because the Roman man was constantly struggling with the fear of losing his authority. Other men approaching the women in his family, the rebellion of his slaves, even his wife behaving too independently, were all perceived as threats to his masculinity. When he met his friends for dinner, you discover the sexual dimensions of Roman male socialization. The conversations over alcohol at these gatherings showed how male solidarity was built through sexual performance. The sexual adventures recounted in these settings were not just personal experiences, but also tools for the social construction of male identity. Each story reinforced the masculinity of the narrator while encouraging listeners to perform similarly. The bath culture of Roman men was an important arena where masculinity was both displayed and tested. Comparing naked bodies, measuring physical strength, and even evaluating the size of sexual organs were all social practices where male identity was constantly negotiated. The competitive dynamics that developed in these environments were not only physical but also related to sexual performance. Which man was stronger? Which man had been with more women? Which man was a better husband and father? All of these were topics of discussion in these social settings. As the night progressed, Gaius's intimate moments with his wife at home provided an opportunity to observe the Roman male's understanding of domestic sexuality. Even in these moments, you notice that male dominance continues in different tones. Sexual intercourse is not only mutual pleasure, but also the most intimate expression of male superiority. However, an interesting contradiction was observed here. Because in sexual intercourse, the man's performance was actually evaluated by his wife's reactions. In this case, male dominance became dependent on the woman's approval. This contradiction created constant tension in the inner world of the Roman man. When you get the chance to observe the anxieties Gaius experiences in the depths of the night, when he is alone, you realize how fragile Roman masculinity is. Behind the display of power lay a constant need to prove himself and a fear of failure. One of the greatest fears of the Roman man was experiencing sexual impotence. This was not just a physical condition, but also meant the collapse of social identity. Therefore, various methods used to enhance sexual performance were an important part of Roman male culture. Aphrodisiac herbs, magical rituals, and even religious ceremonies were all used to preserve and enhance male sexual power. These practices demonstrated how sensitive and constantly demanding a performance masculinity was. Age also played a critical role in Roman male culture. While sexual experience was perceived as a learning process for young men, middle-aged men were expected to be skilled in this area. Older men, with their wisdom and experience, took on the role of guiding younger generations. This age hierarchy was also evident in the sharing of sexual experiences. Older men advised younger men on sexual techniques and how to win women over. This mentoring system ensured the transmission of male culture from generation to generation. There were also significant differences in the experiences of men from different social classes in Roman society. Aristocratic men, slave and freedmen, men born free but poor, all experienced masculinity in different ways. For upper-class men, intellectual superiority was also part of masculinity. Knowing philosophy, being able to write poetry, speaking effectively, these were perceived as traits that increased the sexual attractiveness of the patrician man. For lower-class men, physical strength and practical skills were more important. Being a good craftsman, being able to work hard, being able to support one's family, These were the cornerstones of their masculine identity. The situation of male slaves was much more complex. They were forced to serve their masters' masculine performances, while having very limited opportunities to define their own masculine identities. Freedmen, meanwhile, tried to conform to Roman male culture while also bearing the mark of their origins. Their masculine performance was constantly questioned by men born free. Roman military culture played a central role in shaping male identity. Military success was one of the most important indicators of masculine honor. Courage in battle, leadership skills, and harshness towards the enemy were all considered characteristics of the ideal man. This military masculinity was also reflected in civilian life. Former soldiers were held in special respect in society. Their opinions were listened to, and their sexual experiences were emulated. Military terminology was also frequently used to describe sexual life. The religious dimension of Roman male culture was also important for understanding masculinity. Male gods, especially Mars and Jupiter, were worshipped as divine examples of male virtues. The mythological stories of these gods were sources from which male behavior was modeled. The role of men in religious ceremonies served as divine justification for their social superiority. Being pope, performing priestly duties, and sacrificing animals were perceived as spiritual expressions of male authority. The influence of the Roman legal system on masculinity created institutional safeguards for male dominance. The authority of the head of the family, property rights, and the inheritance system were all mechanisms that legally protected male supremacy. However, within this system, men also had various obligations. Being a good father, protecting one's wife, providing for one's family, fulfilling one's social responsibilities. These were also part of masculinity. As midnight approaches, you begin to grasp the contradictory nature of Roman male culture. The male identity, seeking absolute power and control on the one hand, yet constantly experiencing fragility and performance anxiety on the other, reflected the social tensions of the era. Roman masculinity functioned not only as an individual identity, but also as a fundamental pillar of social order. Preserving male dominance was seen as critical to the stability of the empire. Therefore, any development that threatened masculinity created social anxiety. From a modern perspective, Roman masculinity may seem highly problematic. However, when evaluated in its historical context, it must be understood as a product of the social conditions of that era. The systemic inequalities and pressures created by Roman male culture affected not only women, but also men. Living under constant pressure to perform and struggling with the fear of failure were also costs of male identity. Alongside this complex male experience, it is also necessary to understand the commercial dimensions of entertainment and sexuality in Roman society. The prostitution industry, sexual entertainment venues, and the erotic dimension of gladiatorial games form the subject of the next part of our story. As the darkness of evening enveloped the streets of Rome, a different face of the city emerged. Walking through the narrow streets of the Subura district, you step into Rome's world of sexual commerce. The atmosphere here is very different from that of the aristocratic neighborhoods. As colorful lights flicker behind windows, music and laughter seeping from doorways herald the night's commercial pleasures. This is the heart of Rome's prostitution industry and also the area where the city's sexual dynamics are most starkly displayed. The first thing that catches your attention is how naturally the brothels blend into the fabric of the city. These are not hidden, shameful places. On the contrary, they are accepted parts of everyday commercial life. Lined up among the bakeries, butchers, and weavers' shops, These establishments reflect the open-mindedness of Roman pragmatism when it comes to the sex trade. When you enter one of the brothels, you have the opportunity to closely observe the organization of the Roman prostitution industry. Small rooms line the narrow corridors, each with erotic images depicting different scenes on their doors. These images are not merely decoration. They also serve as a visual menu from which customers can indicate their preferences. The man who runs this establishment is not merely a commercial entrepreneur. He is also a figure occupying a special position in the sexual hierarchy of Roman society. Despite being socially despised, he wields a certain influence thanks to his economic power. This contradiction reflects Rome's ambivalent attitude toward the sex trade. Most of the women working there are slaves. Listening to their stories, you begin to grasp the human cost of Rome's prostitution industry. Some are prisoners of war, some have become slaves because of debt, and some were born into slavery. Each has a different story, but what they have in common is that control over their bodies is in the hands of others. However, there are also different categories and hierarchies within this industry. At the bottom are street prostitutes. They are usually older, sick, or foreign slave women. Higher up are younger and more attractive women working in brothels. At the top are high-class courtesans, sometimes even free women, who are high-level escorts. The lifestyle of these high-class courtesans demonstrates the luxurious dimension of the Roman prostitution industry. These women do not only provide sexual services, they also offer companionship, intellectual conversation, and cultural entertainment. For them, prostitution can sometimes be a path to economic empowerment, especially for those with free status. The customer profile is also very diverse. Young single men, middle-aged men who are married but unsatisfied at home, merchants who have come to the city for business, and sometimes even young male slaves sent by their masters. Each comes here for different reasons, but what they have in common is the desire to purchase sexual services in exchange for money. Observing a customer's experience throughout the night, you notice the ceremonial aspects of Roman prostitution culture. It's not just the sexual act. The bargaining beforehand, the socializing afterward, and sometimes even plans to meet again are all part of this culture. Even the payment systems are interesting. Most transactions are done with money, but sometimes trade goods or even service exchanges take place. This economic flexibility shows how integrated the prostitution industry was into Roman commercial life. Later in the night, you head to more upscale entertainment venues. These are complex establishments offering not only sexual services, but also entertainment, dining, and socializing opportunities. Their owners are typically wealthy freedmen or people from the lower knightly class. The women and men working in these establishments do not just provide sexual services. They also play music, dance, and serve as conversation partners. Most of them possess specific artistic skills. This shows how sexuality and art were intertwined in the Roman entertainment industry. The clientele of these establishments mainly consists of the upper middle class. It is very common for business meetings to be combined with sexual entertainment. Sexual pleasure is incorporated into the process. While political connections are made and commercial deals are struck. In the taverns surrounding the amphitheater, you begin to discover the sexual dimensions of gladiatorial games. Gladiators held a very special status as sexual symbols in Roman society. Their powerful bodies, their courage in facing danger, their death-defying performances, all created erotic appeal. The reactions of female spectators during gladiator games reveal the public dimensions of Roman sexual culture. Even upper-class matrons could show open sexual interest in these men. These situations created moments when normal social boundaries could be temporarily suspended. Some gladiators found opportunities to spend private time with wealthy women after the games. This was not only a source of additional income for them, but also a path to social advancement. Successful gladiators could sometimes find patrons and gain access to better living conditions. Venues surrounding the theater offer another sexual dimension of Roman entertainment. Actors and actresses, especially mime performers, can interact very closely with their audience. These professional relationships can sometimes turn into personal ones. The theatrical performances themselves could also contain erotic content. Sexual themes were particularly common in comedies. This shows how open Roman society was about sexuality in public spaces. Musicians, dancers, and other artists working in these entertainment venues often provided sexual services as well. Their artistic talents were considered factors that enhanced their sexual appeal. This shows how talent and sexuality were combined in Roman culture. Gambling activities in nightclubs also carried sexual connotations. Men who lost at dice games could sometimes pay their debts in exchange for sexual services. This created a complex web of obligations and power dynamics. Some of these venues host private shows. These shows sometimes feature content close to pornography. Audience participation is also encouraged, which blurs the lines between spectators and performers. Private parties organized by wealthy patrons represent the most luxurious dimension of Roman sexual entertainment. At these parties, the boundaries between professional entertainers and guests are much more blurred. Multiple partners, group activities, and exotic practices are much more common. At these private gatherings, social hierarchies can be temporarily suspended. Free-born citizens, freedmen, and even some slaves can interact on much more equal terms. This creates unique social dynamics that would be impossible under normal circumstances. During religious festivals, temporary sexual markets are set up around certain temples. This shows how religion and sexuality intersect in Roman culture. While sacred prostitution is not entirely common, it is considered acceptable in some contexts. Public baths were also popular places for sexual encounters. During mixed bathing times, casual sexual interactions were very common. This shows how normalized sexuality was in Roman public life. Massage services offered in bathhouses are an important part of the services provided. These massages often involve sexual elements. Professional male and female masseurs often offer additional services for extra payment. The regulation of this commercial sexual landscape is largely determined by market forces. State intervention is minimal, mostly limited to taxation and public order concerns. This free market approach allows the industry to flourish. Tax collection from sex businesses is a significant source of government revenue. This demonstrates the government's tacit approval. In fact, successful sex business owners can sometimes even gain significant political influence. As midnight passes, you begin to consider the broader impact of this extensive commercial sex network on Roman society. It is not merely a pursuit of individual pleasure. It is also an integral part of a complex social, economic, and political system. This system also serves to manage certain social tensions. The sexual energy of young men, the dissatisfaction of married men, the integration needs of the socially excluded, all are addressed through this commercial framework. However, the human cost of this system is devastating. For enslaved women and children in particular, there is no choice. Their bodies are treated as commodities. This clearly exposes the fundamental inequalities in Roman society. This commercial sexual culture also has complex effects on the Roman family structure. For most married men, extramarital sexual activity is normal and acceptable. This defines the primary function of marriage as procreation and economic alliance. Women's responses to this system varied. Some accepted it as an inevitable reality. Others developed strategies to gain control over their own relationships. A few even participated as entrepreneurs, albeit under exceptional circumstances. Understanding this extensive commercial sexual network illuminates the deep values and contradictions of Roman society. Pleasure and utilitarianism, exploitation and opportunity, tradition and innovation all coexist in this sphere. By dawn, after this long night of discovery, you begin to appreciate how developed Rome's sex trade was and how integral it was to society. It was not an isolated phenomenon. It touched the fabric of the entire civilization. Alongside this commercial dimension, there are also religious and spiritual aspects to Roman sexual culture. How sexuality features in sacred rituals, fertility cults, and religious festivals will be the subject of the next part of our story. In mid-March, you witness the spring festival celebrations in Rome. The ceremonies of young men donning the adult toga in the city streets. The offerings women make to the goddess of fertility. And the mystical energy felt everywhere reveal the deep connection between sexuality and religious life in Rome. This is not just a religious ceremony. It is also a comprehensive experience, celebrating the sexual identities of society, fertility rituals, and the transitions between the sacred and the profane. As you walk towards the Temple of Venus in Rome on the Palatine Hill, you begin to understand the complex relationship between Roman religion and sexuality. Venus is not only the goddess of love, she is also the legendary mother of Rome and protector of the state. Her cult involves rituals that bridge personal sexual experiences and social order. Inside the temple, the objects offered to Venus by worshippers catch your attention. Symbols of male genitalia, fertility figurines, votive objects representing sexual organs. All are tangible expressions of belief in the goddess's sexual and fertility powers. These offerings are made not only for individual desires, but also for the continuation of the family line, the success of marriages, and the welfare of society. The temple priestesses were key players in Roman religious sexuality. Their roles in the cult of Venus encompassed not only the management of rituals, but also services such as sexual counseling, fertility spells, and the preparation of love charms. This demonstrates the organic link between religious authority and sexual life in Roman society. Observing the aftermath of the Wolf Festival celebrations held at noon in the Field of Mars, you discover the sexual dimensions of one of Rome's oldest fertility rituals. Held in February, this festival is famous for young men running naked and beating women with strips of goat skin. This seemingly primitive ritual actually carries sophisticated symbolic meanings. The sexual symbolism in this festival is multi-layered. The nakedness of the young men represents primal masculinity and fertility. The act of beating the women is perceived as a magical religious transfer of fertility. This physical contact is not only symbolic, it is also a magical act believed to increase actual fertility. The atmosphere around the Temple of Vesta reveals the ambivalent relationship between Roman religion and sexuality. The Vestal virgins were women who had taken a vow of absolute chastity. Their virginity was not only a personal virtue, but was also seen as a sacred power that guaranteed the common welfare of Rome. Observing the daily routines of the Vestal virgins, one understands how strict the imposed celibacy was. Their every movement, conversation, and even thoughts were scrutinized as potential threats to their purity. This reflects Roman society's deep anxieties about female sexuality. However, this extreme chastity paradoxically creates a culture obsessed with sexuality. The Vestal Virgin's assumed virginity is constantly tested, debated, and a source of anxiety. Their sexual purity is thought to be directly linked to the safety of the entire city. In the rituals of the great Mother Goddess cult, you encounter much more extreme sexual practices in Roman religion. The worship of this great Mother Goddess from Anatolia involves self-castration, ecstatic dances, and sensual ceremonies. These practices are in direct conflict with traditional Roman values. The eunuch priests of the Mother Goddess are men who have castrated themselves. Their extreme sacrifice is interpreted as complete surrender to divine feminine power. This is a deeply conflicting religious practice with Roman ideals of masculinity, yet it is officially tolerated. At the Blood Day ceremonies held at the end of March, you witness the most shocking aspects of the cult of the main goddess. Young men injuring themselves, blood sacrifices, and frenzied sexual rituals form the exotic elements of the Roman religious landscape. The acceptance of these foreign cults in Rome reflects the cosmopolitan nature of the empire. Different sexual practices and religious beliefs could coexist under the Roman umbrella, albeit without tension or debate. The cult of the wine god represents the most controversial religious sexual chapter in Roman history. The worship of the wine god is said to have evolved from initially innocent fertility rituals to alleged lustful conspiracies. The Senate decree was an attempt to suppress this cult. The details of this scandal reveal the paranoia of the Roman elite towards foreign sexual religious practices. Mixed-gender religious ceremonies, night gatherings, and wine consumption were perceived as threatening combinations to traditional Roman morality. This suppression effort functions not only as a religious measure, but also as a political and social control mechanism. Under the guise of religion, the government finds an opportunity to control potential political opposition and social deviance. The continuation of these secret rites underground indicates the existence of alternative sexual spiritual communities in Rome. These secret organizations operate as forms of resistance against the constraints of mainstream society. The cult of the Egyptian goddess offers a unique synthesis of female spirituality and sexuality in Rome. This goddess from Egypt combines motherhood, magic, and healing. Her worship provides women with an opportunity for empowerment and spiritual autonomy. Priestesses working in this goddess's temples could deviate significantly from traditional Roman gender roles. They wielded religious authority, performed magical rituals, and sometimes provided sexual counseling. This was a rare opportunity for empowerment for Roman women. The secret rites of this goddess included initiation rituals that made heavy use of sexual symbolism. Metaphors of death and rebirth were expressed through sexual imagery. This represented a deep integration of spirituality and sexuality. The cult of the invincible sun gained popularity in the later imperial period. Sun worship was associated with masculine solar energy. The rituals of this cult celebrated male power and cosmic fertilization. As a secret religion exclusive to men, it forms the religious expression of masculinity and sexuality. Rituals performed in underground temples involve male bonding and initiation through physical and spiritual trials. These levels of religious initiation involve increasingly intense physical and psychological tests. These tests can sometimes involve sexual abstinence, sometimes sexual endurance. The goal is to attain the identity of a spiritual warrior. The Roman household religion regulates daily sexual practices through household gods. Household and family gods oversee family fertility and sexual harmony. Daily offerings and prayers are part of a regular household routine for sexual well-being. Symbols of male genitalia displayed in home shrines are believed to provide protection from the evil eye. These symbols simultaneously serve to ward off evil and increase fertility. Religious elements in wedding ceremonies emphasize the sacred dimension of sexuality. Prayers to Juno, offerings to Venus, and vows to the goddess of harmony are attempts to surround married sexual life with divine blessing. Wedding night rituals contain religious and magical elements. Special prayers, protective amulets, and fertility-enhancing foods are used to ensure the sexual success of the newlyweds. Throughout the year, fertility festivals link human sexuality with agricultural cycles. Rituals during the harvest season draw parallels between human reproduction and crop abundance. The Flower Festival is particularly famous for its sexual content. Held in honor of the flower goddess, this celebration involves public nudity, sexual games, and the participation of prostitutes. This is a seasonal celebration of sexuality. Sacred prostitution, while not entirely systematic, is practiced in certain contexts. Some temples employ sacred prostitutes. These women combine religious service with sexual service. The status of these sacred prostitutes is different from that of ordinary prostitutes. They work under religious protection, and their services are believed to carry divine blessing. Divination counseling sometimes involves sexual questions. People seek divine guidance for love problems, fertility issues, and sexual health concerns. Diviners combine religious authority with sexual advice. Sexual imagery is common in prophetic dreams. The Romans believed that the gods communicated sexual messages through dreams. Dream interpretation is an important part of religious practice. Religious healing provides treatment for sexual dysfunction. Temple healers address sexual problems with a combination of prayers, rituals, and herbal remedies. Sacred springs and healing waters are popular destinations for increasing fertility. Women who want to conceive and men seeking strength regularly visit these places and perform religious rituals. Votive offerings are a common practice for sexual problems and desires. People make promises to the gods for sexual healing, successful childbirth, or marital harmony. Religious calendars indicate auspicious and inauspicious days for sexual activity. Certain days are forbidden for sexual activity. Others are considered particularly favorable. Religious prohibitions may require temporary sexual abstinence. Periods of purification, times of mourning, and preparations for certain festivals require abstaining from sexual activity. The sexual status of priests varies across different cultures. Some require celibacy, others permit marriage, and a few even encourage specific sexual practices. This diversity reflects the complexity of the Roman religious landscape. Religious art freely displays sexual themes in temples. Erotic sculptures, paintings, and reliefs celebrate divine sexuality. The initiation rites of secret religions aim for spiritual transformation through physical experience. These rituals facilitate the transition from ordinary consciousness to sacred awareness. As midnight approaches, you begin to appreciate the deep connection between sexuality and Roman religious life. It is not merely a peripheral element. It is an integral part of the fundamental spiritual experience. This sacred sexual synthesis is one of the unique characteristics of Roman civilization. Other cultures may separate spirituality and sexuality, but the Romans integrated them in complex and sophisticated ways. Understanding this religious sexual culture illuminates the deep values of Roman society. The divine and the human, the sacred and the mundane, the individual and the collective, are all connected through sexuality. This comprehensive religious framework provides context for the imperial period changes we will explore in the next section. The rise of Christianity and the transformation of traditional values form the final chapter of the story we will tell. By the end of the century, some 70 years after the founding of Constantinople, even though the capital of the Roman Empire was now in a different city, you can still trace the deep transformations in sexual culture as you walk the streets of the Eternal City. This is the story of a period when not just an empire, but an entire civilization's understanding of sexuality underwent a profound change. You are witness to the processes that forever altered Rome's sexual life. The rise of Christianity, the gradual decline of pagan traditions, and the emergence of a new moral code. In architecture, the design of private spaces reflects changing sexual ethics. Bedrooms are designed as utility-focused spaces rather than pleasure-focused ones. The economic aspects of sexuality also undergo transformation. Dowry systems are modified to meet Christian ideals of marriage. The sex trade is pushed into the underground economy. Educational practices are adopting very different approaches to sexuality. Sex education for young people emphasizes moral guidance through religious teaching rather than practical knowledge. Sexual behavior in the imperial court is becoming much more regulated. The private lives of emperors are under pressure to conform to Christian moral standards. This significantly influences the behavior of public role models. Sexuality in military culture also undergoes change. Soldier-civilian relations are subject to stricter regulations. Disciplinary measures for sexual misconduct are increased. Provincial administration includes efforts to bring local sexual customs into line with Christian standards. This creates the difficulty of applying uniform moral rules across the diverse empire. Commercial relations are witnessing the gradual removal of sexual services from trade. Merchant communities are developing strategies to adapt to the changing moral climate. Religious syncretism involves the process of replacing pagan sexual deities with Christian saints. The attributes of Venus are transferred to the Virgin Mary, albeit dramatically reinterpreted. Sexuality survives in popular culture through folktales and oral traditions. These underground channels serve to preserve pre-Christian sexual attitudes. Generational conflicts arise between old and new sexual moralities. Older Romans defend traditional ways, while younger generations tend to embrace Christian teachings. Social control mechanisms develop sophisticated systems to monitor sexual behavior. Under the supervision of religious authorities, social surveillance turns private behavior into a public concern. Migration patterns facilitate the interaction of different sexual cultures. The settlement of barbarian tribes brings new sexual practices and attitudes to Roman lands. Economic decline makes traditional luxury-based sexual practices unsustainable. Austerity measures naturally restrict hedonistic lifestyles. Political instability makes sexual relationships part of survival strategies. Marriages increasingly become important tools for providing protection and security. The urban-rural divide is becoming more pronounced in sexual practices. Cities are more sensitive to Christian influence, while traditional customs continue in rural areas. Class divisions take on new forms in sexual behavior. The aristocracy is under pressure to demonstrate Christian virtue, while the lower classes focus on practical concerns. International relations diminish the role of sexual diplomacy. Marriage alliances begin to require not only political advantage, but also religious compatibility. Technological advances bring limited improvements in birth control and sexual health. However, religious doctrine restricts the dissemination of this information. Language changes reflect the evolution of sexual vocabulary. Latin terms are modified to incorporate Christian moral judgments. Literary production addresses sexual themes allegorically and metaphorically. Direct sexual content is becoming increasingly rare, replaced by spiritual interpretations. Philosophical discourse continues to analyze sexuality as part of the cosmic order, but within a Christian cosmological framework. Legal precedent sets new standards for regulating sexual behavior. Church law, at the intersection with civil law, develops comprehensive guidelines for sexual behavior. Medical practice limits sexual health to a narrow focus on reproductive function. Pleasure-oriented treatments are discouraged due to spiritual dangers. As midnight approaches, you begin to contemplate the magnitude of this great transformation. These are not merely superficial changes. They represent a fundamental shift in worldview that affects the entire civilization. Rome's ancient sexual culture has not been completely lost, but it has been profoundly transformed. Elements of it survive underground, in folklore, and in private practices that evade Christian authority. This transitional period laid the foundations that would shape the future sexual culture of Europe. Medieval attitudes towards sexuality would largely be derived from this Roman Christian synthesis. This extraordinary journey through Rome's sexual life not only provides an understanding of the past, but also an appreciation of the historical roots of contemporary sexual attitudes. This fascinating chapter in human history demonstrates that sexuality is not merely a matter of personal pleasure, but also an inseparable part of social organization, political power, religious belief, and cultural identity. Rome's complex and contradictory sexual landscape reflects the eternal themes of human nature: the tension between desire and control, the balance between individual freedom and social order, the dialectical relationship between tradition and change. The sexual legacy of this ancient civilization continues to influence the contemporary world. The attitudes, institutions, and contradictions we have inherited from Rome remain critical elements in understanding our modern sexual culture.